Okay, so now we're going to get into the printhead, and this would be a last resort. If you know your printhead's blocked and regular flushing, cleaning protocols aren't working, you may have to manually flush the printhead. And do this at your own risk. I'm going to show you how to do it. But when I did it, I basically killed the printer, so I'll show you what I did wrong, and hopefully you can learn from my mistake and do it properly. This is also where all the dampers live, so if you need to replace your dampers, we'll go over that. And the printhead on these is expensive. It's over $1,000 unless you get a Chinese knockoff, which I do not recommend. So I'll send a link in the description where you can actually buy a printhead from S.International. But at that point, it may not be worth it because the resale value of the printer is less than what the cost of the printhead is. But if you can save it and try this flushing, then that would be amazing. So let's get into it. So first I'm just going to give you a little overview here. Some of these dampers are disconnected because I flushed the lines with cleaning solution manually just to kind of park the printer. So I didn't fully reconnect those, but these are the lines connecting to your dampers for all your channels. And this is the printer ribbon cable. And then there's a holder that holds all the dampers. So we're going to remove that first, that damper unit, and then we'll remove the printhead. Sometimes it can be helpful to remove this top. There's just one screw here. They actually recommend this in the manual, but I've done it also without removing it. Just comes right off with one screw. Okay. So to remove the damper assembly, there is a screw on the right hand side, right down in here, and also on the left hand side over here. And then there's also a second screw. I'll have to switch the camera angle to show you over here. Let me just move this over. Just above the blue release mechanism is this screw right here. You want to be careful with loosening and tightening that screw because you don't want to torque or break that little metal tab. And again, the magnetized tip on the screwdriver is really helpful. If you don't have one, you can buy a little device that you just pass the screwdriver through and it magnetizes the tip for you. Okay, out you go. And then on the right here. Okay. And that should free up the dampers. And there we go. Like I said, I already disconnected some of these lines, so normally those would stay connected. And then so you could see back behind the dampers, and here are your nozzles that connect to each damper and let the ink through into the printhead. When you go to put this back on, you just have to line up all of these nozzle heads on the dampers carefully and gently with the printhead. So I'll just do that right now. So when you put it back together, you see how to do it. Just gently put it back into place. Push it on there. So there we go. It's seated, and then you just reconnect all those screws. Right side, left, and then the two on the left side. So that's how you do it, putting it back together. If you're going to replace the dampers, go ahead and raise the ink levers, because that will prevent the ink from flowing through the lines and getting all over the place. But a good thing to do regardless is to put some paper towels underneath to catch any drips. And you're going to want some small wrenches to loosen this. Let me just see which one it is. I've got this set of little crescent wrenches here. And I believe it's that one. So what is that? That is 5/16. And then the larger size down here is maybe this one. Yep. That is, oh, I'm sorry. 5/16 for the larger nut on the bottom. And 9/32 for this top nut. Those are your two wrench sizes. And I only recommend using the wrenches if you can't do it by hand, especially when you're tightening these, because you don't want to over tighten them. If you over tighten these, the ink won't flow. There's a delicate O-ring there. So I've already disconnected several of these, but basically you just use the wrench to loosen, and then you can do the rest with your finger. And it's a good idea if you're replacing the dampers to do the O-rings at the same time. And I'll put a link in the description for parts. Not particularly expensive. But there's a bit of a wait because all of these parts come from China, and the shipping's sometimes quite slow. And because I've got the ink levers raised, there is an ink pouring out of these, so that's a good thing to do. And just snap out here. So there you go. Now the damper unit's totally free, and you can see here that there's a little black O-ring right there behind the nut. So when you're putting this all back together, be sure to have an O-ring, a new O-ring. Okay, so here's our damper unit. And there's just two screws that you need to loosen here that removes them from their cage. There's one. And two. And there they go. So there's the two parts, and the dampers, sometimes they just slide right out, sometimes you have to remove the little nut, but it looks like they're coming out fine with these plastic nuts. Sometimes the replacements have a brass nut, and those are a little bit harder to get through. basically you just remove the old ones and then put in the new ones. So for the purposes of the video, let's pretend that I already took them out and I'm putting them back in. So feeding them back in. Nice new dampers here. Just kidding. And like I said before, when you get your new dampers and, oops, I got a little ink on me, and your new O-rings, you can get this whole assembly as a kit part. Make sure that you just put it on finger tight, firm finger tight, but don't wrench it and make it super tight. That will not work properly. So feeding the last one in. Okay, so now they're all in place. And basically you have to make sure that they're seated in these slots. And there's these little round buttons here that correspond with a hinge. Here you can see the hinge. So you basically set the hinge into those buttons and then reconnect. And I just use my fingers to gently line up the dampers in their respective slots. And it takes a little bit of finesse to get them to seat properly. I'm trying to do this so you can have a view, but it's a little awkward. You just push them in and down, and you'll feel them kind of set in. Really important that they're all set properly. Okay, they're all in. And then you just reconnect the screws like that. And then I already showed you how to put this back into place. These nuts would be off and on the line, and again you'd replace those with new O-rings, or if the nuts are in fine shape you could reuse the nuts or get new nuts. They're not expensive. Yeah, so that's about it on the damper replacement, and there's a lot of information about there. After you replace the dampers, you want to make sure to run some cleaning cycles to get all the air out of the system. What you don't want to do is suck the ink through with a syringe from the holes. Don't do that. Just use the cleaning cycles to get the air out. Okay, so let's move on to how to remove the printhead. We're just going to loosen this a little bit. And then remove this one on the left. This is a spring-loaded hinge that holds the printhead in place. Okay. Next, we gently pull down on the printhead and very gently guide it out. As you can see, there's 2 tabs down here. That's why you push it down. Clear those tabs, and then you want to be careful, because if you scrape the printhead against anything while you're doing this, it will damage it. Let's see, am I forgetting something? Nope, I don't think so. There it goes, it just released, there it goes. Okay. Very gently. And remember, there's this metal tab here on the left. So when you're taking it out, be very careful because that comes with. Gotta kind of twist it to the right to gently get that tab out. And there we go. So there is your print head. This one is ruined, it's delaminated. I did that. I'm going to show you how not to do that in the next step, but to fully get this out of here, we have to separate it from the holder it's in and then remove the printer cable there. So to do that, there are 3 screws. Here, here, and here. And be careful with these screws because they're just in plastic, so if you over tighten them, you'll strip it out. Don't want to do that. And as I'm doing this, you can see there's a code on the back here. If you buy an aftermarket head from China for anywhere from $400 to $800, it will not have the correct code. So when you go to format that with the software, it's not going to work. So don't buy those cheap heads. You'll get error messages. The only option if you're replacing a print head that I found is through S.International, which I'll link below. So we've got the holder out, and now we just gently remove this ribbon cable. So right here, you want to very gently pry that out. There's actually 2 cables, top and bottom. And pop, there they go. And this cable, I replaced this. It's not that difficult to do and not that expensive, but I'll show you what happened later, but I basically fried the cable and actually the motherboard. You just have to refold it like the stock one, but the important thing when putting this all back together is to line them up carefully with the correct female side on the print head. So here we've got our loose head, and put that aside for a minute. And then here is the cage that holds it, and you see here on each side there's these little gaskets. Make sure you save those because you'll put them back in place when you're done. They may be a little brittle, but that's okay. They just slide over these little tabs. Here is our setup for flushing the print head. Here's our print head. And what you need is a syringe like this and the right size rubber tube, which came in this kit, print head cleaning solution kit, which I'll link in the description, but I don't use the solution, I use the Piezo flush from Inkjet Mall, which I'll also link. But that's where I got the special hose, the right size hose, but it's possible the hardware store also has that. So the very first thing you want to do this is where I screwed up. I did not do this, is protect the electrical connections on the printhead. Which are here on the side. So I'm just going to use this blue painter's tape and make sure my focus is good here and protect those from water, any liquid. So get that all sealed off. What happened to me is I must have gotten a little cleaning solution on those contacts, and when I went to turn the printer back on, it shorted and it fried the printer cable, it fried the motherboard, which basically cost me the printer at that point because those parts were all too expensive. So don't do that. Protect it. And if you forget for whatever reason, or if somehow you do get any liquid on there, or if you just want to be safe, just wait 24 hours, make sure you let it fully dry out before you turn anything on. So here is a little dish that I just have distilled water in. But I made it out of a yogurt cup. Normally you would use cleaning solution, but I just used this little sour cream container and I cut it with these little indents here so that when I rest the printhead on those lower areas, it just floats in the solution, but the actual head, the electrics and the rest of the head are not touching, just the solution is touching the printhead. And you can just let it soak in there. And the way the printhead works is it's got, if it's dirty you won't see this, but in the right light you can see there's these series of lines, nozzles, where the ink comes out. They're tiny, tiny, tiny lines. And sometimes they get plugged. And this is the most extreme version of unplugging them. These nozzles on the back are connected to those tiny little holes on the front. So once you've just let this sit and soak for quite some time, like several hours, even 24 hours, if that's not enough, you can try what's called reverse waterfall flushing. So you basically connect the syringe to one of these openings and very gently draw suction. And I say that because you don't want to use too much pressure. Here you can see I've got a little bit of ink coming through. And then it's basically going to draw that cleaning solution backwards through that nozzle. Gentle pressure. You can see my syringe filling up here. There's some debate about this. People say both ways, either it's fine or it's not fine, but there is the option to flush the other way, which is the direction that the ink normally flows. You could try that too. I don't know what side of the fence I'm on, whether that's good or not, but I think as long as you're really gentle and not just like blasting the solution through with the syringe, just use very light pressure, it should be fine. And with this whole process, just be very patient. Don't try to force it. Let the flush solution do its work. Let it work its magic. The Piezo flush is designed for dissolving the ink deposit, so it's really good at that. And then as you're going, you may have to refresh the solution in the cup. So there it is. I just did it reverse style, and now I'll just gently push it forward style. And normally I wouldn't do this with the ink still in here, but because this is a junk print head, I'm just going to push it right back through. It's already delaminated. I can't make it worse. I just wanted to give you a demonstration. Gentle, gentle, pushing it back through. And you can actually see it coming out into the tray there. See the dark ink moving through. So there's one nozzle. You would go ahead and do all the nozzles, just like that. But I'm not going to bore you with doing all that, because like I said, this print head is junk. You can go ahead and dump the dirty, refill with fresh as you're going, so you're not reintroducing new clogs. And yeah, a couple other notes. Don't try to take this apart. It's sealed with a seam here, and I think you're just going to ask for trouble if you try to get in there. I did it. In fact, since this is a junk head, I may as well do it. Maybe we'll discover why not to do it. That's the benefit of this old printer, is you can learn at my expense, because it's not worth anything anyway. So what's the harm? May as well experiment. So this is a page. I put it on the head. Come on. There it goes. Okay. Yep. So see there? That comes right off. And I'm going to undo the tape. Again, don't do this. This is just, we're doing this out of curiosity just to see what's back behind here. So that seems like it has some adhesive on there. Yeah, look at that. And it's seamed here with this tape. So that's very interesting. Looks like there are a series of holes here that line up with the nozzles over here that go out into the head, and then all the circuitry here. So I suppose worst case, you could try to flush those separately. That actually just comes right off, see? It just had a thin bead of, it looks like some little rubber adhesive or something, probably to waterproof all this. So if you were to do that and then put it back together, you would just have to make sure that somehow it's still re-sealed. So I don't know if that's worth digging into, but I suppose if you've tried everything else and it's still not flushing through, and you're going to junk the head anyway, you could do what I just did. Okay, let's put this back together so that you can see how it all gets reinstalled. So before we attach this back into its cage, we're going to reconnect these printer cables. So just carefully line them up. Yep, there's one. And there's two. All right, that's in place nicely. Now we reinstall the head into the cage. Make sure those little gaskets are still in their spot. Just sits right in. And then you reattach the screws. There's one. And when you do this, I'd suggest putting a nice bed of paper towels under the head here to protect it and catch any drips. But I'm being lazy because this is a educational junkyard machine. The reason it's so tricky to get this in is that these little grooves have to ride under the wheels, but on the back there's these little nubs that stick out, and those have to go in front of the metal bar that's back here. So you kind of have to simultaneously lift and pull out towards you to get that all to happen. So be careful of the print head as well, making sure it's not hitting any metal. Okay, so now we're at the place where it's got to clear that bottom rail. So to do that, we have to both pull the top towards us and push up at the same time. Being careful not to touch any of the nozzles. And there she goes. And now we have to pull down slightly and to engage these bottom tabs. So pull down, get those to engage, and then push back up. There we go. I didn't have those tabs fully in, so now that they're fully in, we can screw this bottom piece on. There it goes. So that should sit nice and flat, and then you just re-screw this guy right here. Okay, and then you reattach this screw here, and then you put your damper unit back in like we talked about earlier, and you would reconnect your lines to the damper and you'll be good to go. Last step would be putting this top cover back on. Just like that. Up here. Don't forget to put that back on. Oh yeah, I almost forgot to mention that don't forget to retighten this screw on the side here. So that one goes in, tighten all the way. This one you retighten. Thanks for watching, and I hope this video was helpful to you in some way, and I'm no expert, just learning as I'm going here, so take all this with a grain of salt, but hopefully it gives you some insight and courage to just get in there and do some work on your old large format printer. Epson doesn't support these anymore, so it's up to us to keep them alive and running, and if this could help the next person out learning from my mistakes, then that's a great thing.